Today, we're going to walk a tightrope through one of the most dangerous periods in all of human history. This is the story of how humanity stared right into the abyss of nuclear war, and somehow, just somehow, managed to survive. You've probably heard that statement before, right? The Cold War never actually went hot. The two biggest superpowers never formally declared war on each other. There was no single decisive battle. Not even close. For more than 40 years, the United States and the Soviet Union were constantly just one misunderstanding, one miscalculation, one simple mistake away from wiping each other off the map. So this isn't really the story of why the Cold War stayed cold in the textbook sense. No, this is the story of the near misses, the moments where civilization was literally hanging on by a thread. So let's break down this absolutely terrifying timeline. To really get this, we have to start right at the beginning, the exact moment the whole concept of war changed forever. With the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, World War II came to a sudden, violent end. But something way more dangerous had just begun. All of a sudden, the United States had a monopoly on a weapon with just unimaginable power. And you can bet the Soviet Union was watching, and they knew global politics would never, ever be the same again. By 1949, the game changed. The Soviets tested their own bomb. The monopoly was over, and this chilling new logic started to take hold. It was simple, it was absolute, and there was no winning move. This logic got a fitting name, Mutually Assured Destruction, or MAD. And here's the insane paradox of the whole situation. This completely crazy idea is actually what prevented a direct war. It wasn't trust, it wasn't diplomacy. It was the sheer, paralyzing fear of total annihilation. So, if a direct war was basically impossible, how did the conflict keep going? Well, it didn't stop. It just moved into the shadows. And the global temperature started rising, fast. The 1950s kicked off with a major conflict in Korea. Then, Sputnik shot into orbit, proving that a nuclear missile could be delivered to pretty much anywhere on Earth. And then, the Berlin Wall went up, a stark, concrete symbol of a world literally split in two. And this is the key thing you gotta understand. Conflicts like the ones in Korea and later in Vietnam and Afghanistan, they became the new battlegrounds. Millions of people died. But because American and Soviet soldiers never officially fired on each other, that nuclear trigger was never pulled. It was war, just by other means. But fighting indirectly didn't get rid of the risk. Not at all. So now let's get to the moments when the world came the closest to the end. The times when the infamous doomsday clock was, quite literally, minutes from midnight. It's October 1962. American spy planes make an absolutely terrifying discovery. Soviet nuclear missile sites are being built in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of the US. Think about that, close enough to hit Washington, D.C. in a matter of minutes. For 13 days, the entire planet held its breath. President Kennedy was staring down an impossible choice. He could order airstrikes or a full-scale invasion. But here's the thing, either path could trigger an immediate all-out nuclear war. There was no safe move on the board. Now, here's the part of the story that is just mind-blowing. During a super tense naval standoff, the decision to launch a nuclear torpedo from a Soviet submarine came down to 3 officers. 2 of them said yes, but one, Vasily Arkhipov, refused. He wouldn't give his consent. His personal restraint in that one moment almost certainly prevented World War III. You'd think the world would have learned its lesson after that, right? Well, about 20 years later, it happened again. This time, it wasn't a standoff. It was a machine glitch. A Soviet early warning system started blaring, reporting that the US had launched 5 nuclear missiles. And the protocol was crystal clear. Launch a massive counterstrike immediately. But the officer on duty, Stanislav Petrov, he just had a gut feeling. A 5-missile attack? It didn't seem logical for a first strike from the US. So he went against every rule in the book and reported it as a system malfunction. And he was right. It was a false alarm caused by a weird alignment of sunlight on some high-altitude clouds. Once again, it was human judgment, not procedure, that saved the world. So after decades of these proxy wars and heart-stopping near disasters, how did this whole thing finally end? Well, the conclusion was almost as surprising as the conflict itself. Things did ease up a little bit in the 70s, but the real change agent came in the 80s. The Soviet system was just economically exhausted. And when Mikhail Gorbachev came to power, he chose reform over confrontation. This led to the unbelievable fall of the Berlin Wall, and then ultimately the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. The Cold War ended, not with a bang, but with a whisper. So when you step back and look at the whole picture, how did we make it through? It really boiled down to a few critical things. The pure logic of mad made an all-out war unwinnable. Sheer fear took the place of ambition. Those deadly proxy wars, they created a kind of buffer. And in the moments that mattered most, individual human beings chose restraint over protocol. And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? The story of how we survived the Cold War isn't really about power or who had more missiles. It's a story about the critical moments when people decided to pull back from the brink, when caution managed to win out over aggression. And that leaves us with a final, pretty unsettling question. We survived because of a handful of key decisions, a few lucky breaks, and the power of human restraint. It really makes you wonder. As new technologies and new global tensions pop up, will we always be this lucky?